So keep your questions coming, please, in the chat. But I want to move right now on to our next presentation. Mr. Lacey Williams is going to be talking about road transport safety. Lacey is a practicing civil engineer for the last 21 years here. He has a practice here and also internationally. Specializes in transportation engineering at Howard University. And he's going to talk about road safety and transport in Trinidad and Tobago. Lacey, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Townsend. So I'm Lacey Williams, Managing Director of CariTrans Company Limited. And we, as a transportation group, we have been undertaking a number of safety-related studies across the CARICOM region, as well as data collection studies. So jumping right in. All right, so jumping right in. So the objectives of the presentation today are to present the the benchmark as to where we are in terms of road safety in Trinidad and Tobago. Take a look to delve a little bit into the driving behavior and attitudes of our local driving population based on some statistics and data from previous studies, and how that relates to the actual demerit point system, how since the onset of the commissioning of the system in May last year, so roughly 1 year, how that has been going. And then finally, to close off on a little bit of education and collaboration among key stakeholders, where some of the gaps are presently in terms of meeting our goal towards zero fatalities on the roadway. Just as an introduction, and to keep 3 points in mind as we go through the presentation. Generally, fatal accidents have been decreasing in Trinidad and Tobago over the last 5 years, and you'll see that in the upcoming slides. The economic cost of a death locally is estimated at approximately $6.5 million TT dollars, and this figure was generated based on the IRAP standard for computing the economic cost of a fatality, not a fatal accident, but a fatality in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, by no means is this meant to trivialize the impact of a death to any of us who have lost loved ones in a road traffic accident. It's just simply a measure to estimate what it actually costs the economy when one of our loved ones is lost. And finally, to keep in mind that behavior can play and does play a significant role in the cause of accidents. So, looking at the charts, this figure is actually taken from the Arrive Alive website, so you can feel free to visit them for some interesting statistics outside of these. Over the past decade, we have seen a rough halving of the incidence of road fatalities in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have gone from a high of almost 200 at the beginning of the decade to just under 100. So by any stretch of the imagination, in 10 years, if you were to reduce your traffic road fatalities by almost a factor of 2, then that means you must be doing something really well. And I must say, with the introduction of the breathalyzer system, which occurred in the decade, the introduction of speed enforcement, some degree of heavy vehicle weight enforcement, we have been able to make a significant dent in the road fatalities as recorded. However, there's always room for improvement. And again, this figure is taken from the Arrive Alive website. When we look at the breakdown by day of road traffic accidents, we see really the real culprit or when we look at 2019 as compared to 2020, we would have seen that weekends, Sundays and Saturdays, we had the highest incidence of road fatalities. So from 2019 to 2020, there has been a significant drop in these statistics. In fact, on a Saturday, we can see we almost have half the number. However, during the week, we can see that we have increases across a number of the days. So on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, we're actually seeing increases. So then it's important, if we're looking to head towards zero deaths by 2030 or sooner, hopefully, then it means that while we pat ourselves on the back for the successes of the previous decade, there's a lot more we need to do. So we need to look scientifically at what the causes of these increases are. Of course, one may consider that the pandemic may have skewed some of these results a bit, and that may be so, but in the absence of that information, it's important that we have a concerted look at these figures to ensure that we continue to drive towards zero deaths. So one of the areas I think we need to really look at is our driving behavior. And this here is a snippet of some data that we would have collected pre and post COVID-19, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we would have done a number of speed studies across the Eastern Main Road, for those of you all familiar with the geography of Trinidad and Tobago, the priority bus route, which is essentially supposed to be a exclusive mass transit route along the east-west corridor of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as on the Churchill-Roosevelt Highway. So the data I'm presenting before you here is actually a snippet of data collected on the Eastern Main Road. And it shows what the breakdown of the speeds are across the various survey sites. So we see here we have on the Eastern Main Road in Dabadi, we have a posted speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour. And pre and post pandemic, the average speeds remain relatively the same. The 85th percentile speed, which is essentially the speed at or below which 85% of your driving population will be driving, and it's in some jurisdictions it's used as a means of setting your posted speed limit. You see that those speeds haven't really changed. However, if we look at the maximum speeds, the comparison between the maximum speeds of those two periods, we see a huge difference. So we have gone from 107 kilometers per hour maximum speed to 121 kilometers per hour maximum speed. So that's in the upper 15 percentile range. When we look at the numbers within the average speed of the speeders, so in other words, the average speed of those exceeding the speed limit in this regard, what we are seeing is that you have quite a number of people who we'll consider to be the quote-unquote delinquent drivers. We're actually seeing them getting more and more, as we say locally, out of hand. So in short, in summary, what this is indicating is that for those of us that tend to follow the law and tend to be followers of the highway code, we tended to stay there even in pandemic conditions when traffic conditions would have eased and it was easy to go at whatever speed you desire. However, those who were so inclined to be more of the higher risk takers, we found that there was a really there's an increased susceptibility to that and to really push the envelope where that is concerned. So when we look, for example, at the demerit point system in the 6 months that had been in play or in force as of December 16, 2020, we saw that 68 drivers had been disqualified from driving, with another 1,000 set to be disqualified from holding a driver's permit. So when we look at those numbers, in relation to what we would have seen on the previous slide, then we can see, why these statistics could be where they are. So I just want to present a little quote, or just to look at an excerpt from the Trinidad and Tobago press, where we have, just a second, I'm seeing someone indicating that they can't see the presentation.
I'm seeing it, Lacey, go ahead.
Okay, I think someone is indicating that my controls are actually obstructing the presentation. Okay, all right, so looking at this excerpt, when we disaggregate and we look into some of the behaviors that we observe on the roadway, we're seeing here, again, this is a quote from the local press. During a road traffic exercise in the Northern Division conducted by officers attached to the Traffic Branch Road Policing Task Force, the driver was driving a Nissan Almera while playing loud music. He was stopped and a request was made for his driver's permit by the police constable. However, the driver claimed he left it at home, and while issuing the ticket for playing a noisy instrument, the cop found out he had been disqualified from driving by the Transport Commissioner, having exceeded the demerit point threshold. So what is this saying? Well, this person was suspended from driving some time before, yet still he took the opportunity to utilize the roadway without a driving permit and to commit a further breach while approaching a clearly visible road traffic, a roadblock. So then what does that say in terms of behavior? Now, I can hear the colorful adjectives just blaring through the computer as to, how we could characterize this individual. But unfortunately, there are several instances of similar type behavior as not to be discounted. Because as I said, the ultimate goal is to get to zero deaths on the nation's roadways. So if we discount the portion or the cohort of the population that behaves in this particular way, then we may get to a plateau and never go beyond that. Okay, and just to sum up the behavioral aspect, when we look at the top 5 road traffic offenses for the last few years, and this has been confirmed by the police, we are seeing that driving without seat belts, driving without a valid driver's permit, exceeding the speed limit, use of mobile devices, breach of road traffic signs are the 5 most common road traffic offenses. All of these, of course, they are behavioral, but when you look again at the number of years from which the proclamation of these regulations have been made, it makes you wonder, well, if we know the consequences of these actions, why are we pursuing it? So switching a little bit to the role of heavy vehicles and the need for education and collaboration among the key stakeholders and the decision makers. We have seen in 2019 that there were 8 accidents related to or directly attributed to heavy vehicles or where heavy vehicles were at fault, and 9 in 2020. And while that may seem small, heavy vehicles in our road traffic stream, based on the data we collect, at any time is not more than about 6% of the vehicular population. So in other words, at a maximum 6% would be heavy vehicles, the rest would be light vehicles, mainly motor cars and motorcycles, as the case may be. Yet still, they account for up to 10% at times of the fatalities recorded for the year. So what that means is that, remembering the figure before where we have a $6.5 million price tag estimated for the economic cost of a road fatality, the accidents from trucks alone can get us somewhere in the region of $65 million in economic loss to the society. And these are real costs. I mean, you don't see them immediately, but obviously when it comes to a host of other things, then that is actually felt in other ways that we don't necessarily see up front. The heavy vehicles also play a major role in the quality and the longevity of road infrastructure. So, looking at our Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, essentially, heavy vehicles are allowed to carry axle loads as high as 10 tons, yet the Ministry of Works actually specifies to the design consultants that the road be designed for 8.2 tons per axle. Now, the legislators and the transport officers, as the case may be, they are not engineers, so they may not understand the implication of these. And this is where the education and collaboration needs to take place. Because based on the way roads are designed, which is for a 20-year period using a damage factor, which is this is what you see in the bottom equation, we realize that the damage we cause to the roadway is not linear. So in other words, if I increase my axle load from 8.2 tons to 10 tons, the damage doesn't increase linearly by a factor of whatever that ratio is. It actually increases much faster than even an exponential rate. So if I were to do the calculation for the damage factor created by a 10-ton axle load as compared to an 8.2-ton design, my damage factor goes to 2.2. So what does that mean? It means, therefore, that if I design a road for 20 years, then I ought not to expect the roadway to last even 10 years, given 10-ton vehicle loads being allowed to traverse the nation's roadways. And I dare you, any of my Trinidad and Tobago colleagues, if you can point out any road where there's significant truck traffic that has lasted 20 years without major rehabilitation, I would really love for you to show that to me. So the following slides, I'm just going to show you what that translates to on a number of roadways, in fact, 4 actually across Trinidad and Tobago, where we would have done heavy vehicle weight testing, just to give you an indication as to what the loads are on our nation's roadways. So on Lady Hills Avenue, this is in the San Fernando region, we found that in some cases, depending on the direction, almost half the axles measured were overloaded, with an average overloading of about a half a ton. So not that bad, but still not where we would like to be. On the Claude Noel Highway in Tobago, we actually saw that roughly half of the vehicles weighed in one direction, or half of the axles weighed in one direction, were overloaded by as much as 4 tons. So recall that the difference between the legal axle limit is 10 tons, the design axle limit is 8.2 tons. On average, these vehicles were carrying 12 tons per loaded axle. When we look at the Valencia main road, so this is in Northeast Trinidad, where we have the quarries and the quarry trucks, etc., where we get a lot of the transportation of material for construction, etc. We found that the average overloaded axle was 7.5 tons, so almost twice the design weight, with approximately 84% of the trucks being overloaded. And then finally, on the Sir Solomon Hotroy Highway, this was a demonstration exercise undertaken with law enforcement. We found that the average overloaded axle was 2.7 tons. Again, this is a design load limit, not the legal load limit of 10 tons, but still, of course, it's still exceeding. And roughly half the trucks were overloaded, with overloaded axles being 33% of those surveyed. So what does that mean? Well, it means then that once you have premature damage, then the government of Trinidad and Tobago and through Ministry of Works and Transport then has to divert critical resources towards the rehabilitation of our roadways. Critical resources that can go directly toward road safety education campaigns, road safety infrastructure devices, as the case may be. And most of all, in a time where resources are finite, sometimes the roads cannot be repaired in time. So what does that mean? Well, roadways that are not up to standard can be a hazard to the road user. So then how do we then square that with the number of road fatalities that would have taken place over the last decade? Could there have been an opportunity to reduce those numbers even more if there were opportunities for enforcement or more regular enforcement of the heavy vehicle load limits over the particular period? When we look at the performance of the heavy vehicles in particular, before us here, I just have a slide of a laboratory exercise conducted in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 2016, where they took a semi-trailer, what we refer to as a tractor trailer in Trinidad and Tobago, and they conducted tests at different loads, starting from loads below the maximum gross vehicle weight, all the way to almost 20% overloading of the vehicle. And then subsequent to that, they took measurements of the braking distance of the vehicle with the brakes removed from one of the axles of the truck, which would essentially represent defective brakes on a truck, or a combination of defective brakes and defective tires, as the case may be. So when we look at the blue bars, for example, what we would see is a gradual increase in braking distance, which is obviously, goes without saying. 80,000 pounds here, which is roughly 36 tons gross vehicle weight, being the maximum gross vehicle weight for the truck. So you would see that essentially up to a certain point, the bars remain fairly the same and then increase gradually. However, when we remove the brakes from the truck, look at what happens. Across all the loads, even though the vehicle is carrying 20,000 pounds less than its maximum gross vehicle weight, or carrying roughly, what's that, 3/4 of its weight, you still have almost a tripling of the braking distance. So again, we can readily see the impact of what a defective truck can have on road safety in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, we might think that all trucks will have brakes, and why should we present this information? Well, this is as you overload trucks by a certain amount, the cost of maintenance and the frequency of maintenance increases again exponentially. So when trucks aren't maintained, which, if you speak to our colleagues in the licensing office and perhaps some of Telesex and the police officers, what we readily see is that there are several trucks that drive on the nation's roadways that are not fully serviced and maintained. So are we in a situation where out of those 8 or 9 trucks that I would have mentioned in 2019 and 2020, some of these issues could have contributed to those road deaths. And again, being an opportunity for us to make the necessary adjustments. Okay, so in summary, significant work has been undertaken to reduce road fatalities by the TT authorities, and we commend them for that. It has been a long road, yes, but a successful road, I might say. However, there's always opportunity for improvement and with collaboration with all parties involved, including you and I. The majority of the road users are reasonable. It may not appear so, but the data borne out just by that example I gave with the speeders, or the speed data, suggests that the majority of road users are reasonable. It's those that tend to push the envelope, they tend to be really off the charts. Attitudes and behaviors of delinquent drivers must be addressed in addition to enforcement. So while the enforcement would take care of the legal authority for you to utilize the roadway, there must be a changing of attitudes and behaviors so that we don't get there in the first place. And further, if you were to get there, that you don't think that you're so much above the law that you can take the chance and drive without a valid driver's permit. There must be some sort of attention given to the individual in terms of curbing and adjusting those attitudes and behaviors. Interagency collaboration and education is key to improving on successes. So, that goes without saying. So the understanding, for example, between the Ministry of Works and Transport and the licensing office, whether they make a decision to design the roads to 10 tons or reduce the axle loads to 8.2 tons, then again, with the appropriate collaboration and direction from each of the parties, a compromise can be had or adjustment can be made as necessary. And of course, enforcement in critical areas. We mentioned that, yes, there has been an effort to do heavy vehicle axle load enforcement over time, but again, the frequency and the consistency has not been there. So again, those are areas that can make a major dent in the overall numbers. So finally, we're in a good position in terms of the trends over the past decade, but we can do more. Road safety is our collective responsibility. So it's not just as the authorities to do what they need to do. Each one of us here in this presentation or this webinar can play our part, even if it's to educate our children, to speak to our colleagues in the office about road safety, encouraging us to follow the highway code as far as possible, or even to get involved with our NGOs. Arrive Alive, we have the TTPS Road Safety Task Force. There are several ways in which we can actually support our road safety stakeholders, so I encourage us to get involved. Education and collaboration are critical to success, and again, everyone should be working towards the goal of achieving 0 deaths by 2030. So thank you very much, Mr. Moderator and everyone, and I take it back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lacey. And you have put some things on the table there that will require, of course, a further deliberation on day 2. And just a reminder to panel, all those participants who have questions, keep posting them on the chat. I know we're running kind of tight on time, but I've also asked the panelists to see how many of those questions they can answer as we go along. But never fear, if we can't get to them at the end of the day, we will be getting to them either tomorrow or on day 3. If anything else remains unanswered, then we will get to them and get back to you. I want to move right on to now Mrs. Selina Mohammed Wilson, who is actually a transportation consultant with many years of experience. She has a Master's of Science in Transport Planning and Policy from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, and she is based in Jamaica, and she's going to bring her thoughts to bear in the area of the private sector investment in public transportation. So that over to you, Mrs. Mohammed Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Selina Mohammed Wilson, and I will be presenting on making public transport more attractive to private investment. Excited to be a part of this symposium and looking forward to the discussions that will follow. All right, so in this first section, Just a moment, please. Okay, in this first section, we'll first define PPP and then discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of PPPs. So why public-private partnerships? Across all infrastructure sectors, energy, housing, transport, and other services, government face an ever-growing dilemma. Traditional public procurement falls short of bridging the gap between available finances and infrastructure development needs, both in developed and developing countries. To offset these challenges, government decides to share the construction with a private partner who has the resources to finance the construction and operation through what is known as a public-private partnership. So PPPs have been defined globally to cover a wide range of contractual and business relationships and arrangements between government and the private investors. In a PPP, the state is the owner of the infrastructure and is accountable for the provision of all services to the people. The private partner is responsible to finance, design, construct, operate, and maintain the project. Then they recover the initial investment through service fees from the government or through user fees from the public. The government's role is to supervise the service provision in the best interest of the public. So these relationships typically involve varying degrees of risk sharing and responsibility for different projects. You typically tap into the strength of the private sector, how to attract and invest capital, how to avoid cost overruns, how to operate. The public sector strength lies in the regulatory framework that guides the PPP, for example, permits, tax exemptions, and other regulatory provisions. Some risks, though, are borne by both parties, like sufficient user demand for a project or force majeure, like a natural disaster. So if we're to officially define PPP, it is a pact between the public and private sectors in which the proficiency of each party is focused in the designing, financing, building, and operating an infrastructure project or providing a service through the appropriate sharing of risks, resources. What are some of the advantages? Access to finance. PPP is viewed as a means to finance projects that would not otherwise be feasible due to budget constraints. So it really provides, it provides a short-term relief which alleviates infrastructure funding issues to the extent that the fees can be charged or additional revenue generated. For example, a bus terminal. At the government side, the main responsibility is passenger services, but the private sector might be able to identify and develop other sources of funding more efficiently, like shops, parking, and so on. Access to technology. For the public sector, one of the greatest advantages of the PPP is the efficiency gains to improve the operation and management and access to technology. The goal is to improve the quality of the public service delivery by taking advantage of the private sector efficiency. For the private sector, it is an opportunity for increased innovation through technical cooperation. Transfer of risk. The balance between cost and risk for the sector and risk and reward for the private sector is the crux of all PPP projects. I had mentioned earlier that each accept risks that are more suited to them and some risks are shared, but the greatest benefit here is the transferring of risk to the private sector. By transferring this risk, government finances are protected against potential that are often significant in public infrastructure projects. Finally, investment opportunities. Without PPP, few private companies would have the chance to work on major capital infrastructure projects, which helps them to develop knowledge, experience, and skills, and which can then be constructively reapplied back into the private sector, or even the public sector at different levels. When the projects are well executed, it benefits all. So what are some of the disadvantages? PPP procurement has a high procurement cost. This has to do with the structural complexity that is associated with the high transactional costs, particularly during the tender process. Therefore, the project must be big enough to justify so that the PPP efficiency outweighs. In some countries, PPPs are only considered for projects over a certain threshold. PPPs are not suited for all types of projects. Even in countries where they're promoted actively, only a limited number of projects are typically pursued. For example, PPP doesn't work well in sectors like IT, which is rapidly changing, but they are appreciated where there's a long-term predictable need. The key question that you must always ask is, what are your project objectives? Political non-compliance. New administrations can perceive that they're only paying for an infrastructure project that generated political benefit to others, and also that it will reduce their budget to develop new projects. So to mitigate, the necessary policies must be in place to prevent any disruption to the project. And finally, PPP inflexibility. PPP structure can be relatively inflexible and poor at accommodating change, understandably so. Imagine changing project specifications after the project has been awarded. So just to briefly look at PPP in transport, how does it benefit transport? And I'll be discussing 2 transport projects within the region that have applied PPPs. So public-private partnerships can be an effective way to build and implement new transport infrastructure, or to renovate, operate, maintain, and manage existing transport infrastructure. For example, toll roads. Similarly, as cities grow and traffic congestion increases, governments are looking for increasingly new ways to shift from private to public transport, for example, the implementation of a bus service. And in both areas, PPPs can be beneficial. So if we look here at Highway 2000 in Jamaica, which we fondly call H2K, the Jamaica state-owned entity, National Road Operating and Construction Limited, NROC, oversaw the design, construction of the project, provided contingent support, and acquired the land necessary for the construction and operation of the highway. In November 2001, NROC formed a partnership with a privately owned entity, Transmilenio Limited, who was the developer of the highway, to coordinate the development of the network, including its financing and construction. TJH then contracted the Jamaican branch of Boeing as the main builder. Since 2002, maintenance and operations on the Highway 2000 have been handled by the Jamaica Infrastructure Operator Limited, the JIO, and they are the operator of the highway, controlled by Vinci Concessions. In 2019, TJH private foreign stakeholders sold the totality of their shares to NROC, and it reverted to the government, which they took the opportunity to offer for sale on the Jamaica Stock Exchange in February of 2020, and they only retained 20%. PPP model used here was a build, operate, maintain, transfer, and most of the risk was borne by the private partners, and the payment was made by government. Another PPP project in the region, the Transmilenio, and most of us might be aware of this BRT system, as it is considered a model case for mass urban transit and has been replicated by various cities. The Transmilenio phases 1 and 2 is an 82-kilometer bus rapid transit system, and it was designed as a PPP where the public sector provides the infrastructure, planning and design, management and contracting for public services, and oversight and control. So the public bore most of the risk. The private sector was engaged through multiple concession agreements to provide feeder and trunk bus operations, as well as fare collections. The trunk and feeder operators assume 100% of the ridership risk and were paid a share of the fare revenue based on availability, ridership, and quality of service. Concessions were awarded on a finance, operate, maintain basis for a 10-year period based on 8 criteria, the 2 most important being the lease price per kilometer and previous operating expenses. Other criteria included like environmental performance, bus fleet manufacturer, bid team composition, but criteria. The procurement process incentivized the older, disorganized, and inefficient bus companies and operators to restructure and to form partnerships in order to bid. So this was a more management type of PPP model that was applied. So if we look at small island developing states, and I won't get into this too much because Mrs. Bennett Innes went into, she spoke comprehensively of the issues that we're facing in small island developing states, but we're just gonna briefly look at transport systems here. So we're small remote islands, we're mountainous, economic activities are focused on the periphery of most islands. We're constrained in many, many other ways. The planning of transportation systems and mobility infrastructure is either poor or non-existent. Many, if not most, services have grown sporadically or organically in response to highly localized demands. In many islands, getting from one place to another is problematic, especially outside of the populous areas. There are often many one-man operations or a collective of sole traders that are free to set their working schedule, their holidays, and sometimes their prices. And here, since COVID, whenever it's close to curfew time, all the taxi operators would double or triple their prices because people are desperate to get home before the police come around. And the transport infrastructure does not support a build out of a public transport system, which further compounds these issues. We understand the importance of transport to the economy. It's a key in social development. It brings opportunities and it enables economies to be more competitive. Inadequate transportation systems can mean the difference between sustainable progress and persistent underdevelopment. And as we continue to confront the mounting expense and poor efficiency track records of publicly funded, highly subsidized transport operations, we are looking for new input for our transport systems. So how can we make public transport more attractive to private investment? Well, private partnerships should be structured to maintain the public interest. And I know this sounds contrary to what I'm going to say now, but this is to my title, sorry. But this is very important because government is often considered the beneficial party of a PPP, and as we often don't have the resources for financing. In a vast majority of the circumstances, I beg your pardon, control and oversight of the public asset must remain with the entity whose client is the public interest. The governmental or public entity that holds this responsibility must carefully evaluate the transfer of risk and the concomitant transfer of control to assure that whilst these transfers are bringing commercial benefits, it's maintaining the preservation and sustainability of the public interest. PPPs should be utilized as a strategy to achieve public goals and support long-range plans. So they are often proposed as a means of implementing projects in ways that do not directly support goals for multimodal transport investment. We often don't look at, for example, H2K. We simply implemented a highway. And we didn't look at how we could create a spin-off for other types or other modes of transport to operate alongside the highway. So we're often short-sighted when we're doing these projects or when we're looking at our PPPs, and we need to look at how we can make them into multimodal transport investments. Station assets should not be sold simply for the sake of general revenue enhancement, especially if the generated revenues are used for purposes other than improving transportation or services, which brings me to my next point. PPPs are most effective in those cases where a long-term revenue stream can be assured. The private sector can only be a useful partner in those cases where capital risk by a private partner has a strong probability of generating long-term return on that investment. In order for such a return to be generated, the presence, predictability, and stability of a long-term revenue stream is likely to be. And finally, PPPs should be based on constructive and beneficial sharing. One of the key premises underlying PPPs is the sharing of risks inherent in any project development. This means that the public sector and the private sector assume those risks which they are best suited to accept. The private sector needs to see that government is accepting its share of the risk to feel comfortable in making the investment. For example, a common risk allocation may be for the private sector to accept the risk inherent in the cost and timeliness of construction, while the public sector is more capable of accepting the risk associated with clearance, public acceptance, and ridership for development, for the development of a capital project. So in summary, to make it attractive, long-term goals, which leads to long-term revenue stream, which be willing to accept risks, and always remember public interest first. All right, so this table was taken from a recent publication by Wright et al. 2021, titled Public Transportation in the Caribbean of Paratransit Modes. Hi, Leah. And here we are looking at the different types of public transport in the countries: Jamaica, Trinidad, St. Lucia, Guyana, and Barbados. You'll note that most countries have various types of public transport. That being, you see the city bus, the minibus, the taxis, and the city buses, state, and the taxis and the minibuses are privately owned public transport. So there are some countries like St. Lucia and Guyana, which rely solely on these privately owned transport. And in most countries, what is commonly used is the minibus. Now, I believe my colleague, Mr. Lacey Williams, spoke about someone who was ticketed for playing loud music. And this is something that we see frequently happening in minibuses. The minibus operations, they typically operate outside of what we expect how we expect public transport to operate. They're speeding, loud music, passengers are forced to cram like sardines. It's simply overcrowded, as even the aisle is typically used for seating or standing. In a coaster bus where people are standing elbow to face, being swung and flung for every pothole that they encounter, drivers are reckless with people's lives. Have you ever been on or seen a coaster bus in Jamaica taking a corner? It's gravity defying. But what has led to this? Many bus drivers are untrained, as it is usually a fallback profession. The penalties are not punitive enough to discourage poor driving practices. Government isn't supplying the capacity to meet the demand, and so we are reliant on these modes to supplement the services, especially during peak periods. There are inadequate policies to address issues of road safety, public transport operations, and so on. For example, these privately owned public transport operators, what sort of qualification or training have they received? How about a learner's permit until, for example, a certain number of hours have been acquired, defensive driving training, 0 infractions within a certain period, and so on before they're given a full permit to operate within the public space. In other countries in Jamaica, despite state-owned transport offering a more reliable, safe, and comfortable mode of transport, minibuses, coasters, and taxis are the preferred options, owing to state-owned transport typically operate on schedules and routes and do not always meet the immediate need of a passenger around, and therefore more frequent trips. State-owned buses sometimes operate in the same manner, so why not choose the quicker, more frequent option? From the government's perspective, it is a means of employment, lessening the public burden and reducing the unemployment rate. We know people don't consume transport for transport. It is a means to an end. So if government cannot provide the means for public access to the services that they need, then people will resort to other modes. And what is the resultant effect? A rise in vehicle ownership and its attendant problems such as congestion, environmental concerns, road safety, and so on. So we'll now look at some PPP models and how they might be applicable and how we need to enable them to be enforced in the Caribbean. First, we need to look at what it is that we're trying to achieve. What are our goals and objectives, and what responsibilities are we going to allocate to the private sector? Can we look at incorporating these private equity, the taxis and the minibuses, into the transport system, or do we need to revamp the entire system given the current operating conditions? So PPP models, I won't get into the different types of models, the technicalities. I mean, the characteristics, which really are the risks, the cost of investment, the obligations, and really who assumes most of what the model is used. So if we look at this model, the management contract model, for example, here the provision of services on certain routes or for certain services can be contracted to privately owned public operators, the minibuses and the taxis. For efficiency gains, the private operator gains are tied to specific targets such as reliability, frequency, ridership, safety, and quality of service. There is no transfer of commercial risk. which makes this less challenging to implement. Operators are therefore on performance-based contracts where fees are paid based upon performance criteria that an operator must maintain. If the criteria are met, then the operator collects the full fee. For example, no more than X number of crashes during Y period of time. Hence, the operators are incentivized to maintain optimum standards. However, this model requires monitoring of performance by the government to ensure standards are met and service is delivered. Fees collected by the government can be reinvested to improve the infrastructure, for example, bus stops and terminals. So in Jamaica, we sub-franchise some routes that are typically controlled by the state-owned JUTC. The licensees pay an annual fee to operate a specific route, which the JUTC uses to supplement its income. Another state entity then is for enforcement. There is no performance monitoring. It's really on a first come, first served basis. We don't have enough buses to meet the demand. So we really look towards coaster buses and the minibuses to supplement the fleet. In Trinidad, it is my understanding that in the 90s, the maxi taxi operators were to provide school bus service on rural routes. The Ministry of Education would pay the operators and they were monitored by the bus company. And these are very similar to management contract models, which are simpler models that can be easily implemented. Another model is the design, build, operate, transfer model. And this model requires a more significant investment to be borne by the private investor. Here, the government is looking to open a public transportation system through a long-term investment, which can involve two possible sources of revenue for the private partner. This can be charging the users of the asset directly or charging the government through availability payments. There are efficiency gains in all aspects of the project as the private partner is responsible for financing, operating, and maintaining the asset. There are therefore more risks to the private sector, but it is more costly in the initial stages to the government. I know Barbados attempted this with the Barbados Transport Board in 2019. Bid was placed by the government for the supply of new energy efficient buses, fare collection system, scheduling and dispatching, maintenance, and the government would be paid a portion of the revenue, but it would be largely the private investor. However, well, I can't say the project fell through because Mrs. Bennett Ennis referred to the fact that the Bayesian government has now gotten some electric buses. So I guess they decided to take another approach. Finally, creating an enabling environment. How can government facilitate the development of PPP projects? And what can government do to foster a PPP enabling environment? Policy formulation. Do we have policies that support this? If not, we need to create policies. We need to look at our objectives, the type of PPPs to be used, what is our intention? Legal and regulatory environment. Do we have any laws that speak to PPP? And if we do, what does it say about the private partner eligibility? Do we allow foreign investors to bid? Institutional arrangements. Do we have the capacity for supervision, quality assurance, monitoring, all of these things? And what about auditing? Are we going to look at external auditors to monitor projects or programs? Sufficient resources to prepare PPP contracts. And recall earlier that it's usually capital intensive in the beginning of a PPP arrangement for the government because of the procurement contract. So here we have to, if we are to use PPP models, we have to look at our macro environment. Do we have a qualified labor force for the same institutional arrangements? Do we have a sizable customer base? And is there potential for growth? What is our demand? And that concludes my presentation.
Very much. Thank you very much, and some thought-provoking questions there. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions on the chat as well in terms of how in Trinidad and in Jamaica and these countries we can use that operational PPP model. But as I said, you're going to touch on those questions at the end. Just a reminder, if you have not yet put your location on the map, you're going to be showing the map. Let me just show what the map looks like. If I can share my screen just momently, if I get it right, I get it right. If not, then I'm going to be embarrassed, but let's see, share. Okay, I think this is it. I may be wrong. No, that's not it. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. So that is not it. That is gonna stop. Not quite. All right, I'll get it right before we, but I'll practice it before we come back. But we have about 17 countries signed on. If your country is not yet signed in, just go to that place on the map and sign in. But right now we're gonna move right into our next presentation by Curtis Mohammed. Curtis is Vice President of Sustainable Energy Development. He's the president of the NGC CNG Company Limited. He is the Vice President of Sustainable Energy Development at the National Energy Corporation. And he is a chemical engineer from UE trained, and he has a master's in engineering management as well. Tremendous experience in terms of oil, gas, and manufacturing sector. So I'm going to ask Curtis just to share his video, unmute his mic, and make his presentation. Thanks a lot, Curtis.
All right. Are you hearing me?
Hearing you loud and clear.
And you're seeing my presentation?
I'm seeing your presentation. You're on.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So good day, everyone. Hi, Trevor again. And to the rest of the Caribbean family there, good day, everyone, and to the other visitors across the world. So what I'll do is I'm going to give a presentation about green transport solutions in a way that we think that would have some relevance to the topic on the discussion right now, Trevor and company. And what we will do is kind of highlight a bit about what we would have done as the CNG company, because we are really a special purpose company. It's an alternate fuel type company. And I'll try and touch a little bit on some of the discussion that would have happened before with some of the other presenters, because it has some relevance in our discussions. So just give me one moment. Okay, well, this is our disclaimer. We've given good information, but please hold it against us. I'll start off with a quick note about greenwashing. We know what's been happening. A lot of companies worldwide now, they have very good intentions, but we tend to see a lot of emphasis on what they're actually doing already, or what they might be doing. And the danger with that is sometimes we start to telegraph the wrong information to the public, right? So a case in point would have been the Volkswagen emission scandal that you all would have heard about some last year, actually, the year before, where companies they went in, they misrepresented exactly what they were really doing under the guise of things green. And that is something that all companies and all leaders need to be very careful about. Greenwashing, making sure you don't send the wrong message. And at the end of the day, what you're doing is not 100% really correct. And we know what the outcome of that would have been, right? That's 17 or so billion US dollar fine. So on our presentation today, very quickly, because let's not talk about green transport solutions. We're going to talk to a little bit about what the land, marine, and aviation options would be for Trinidad and Tobago. We'll very briefly recap the CNG program in Trinidad and Tobago, and then spend a little more time on natural gas vehicles, but also, very importantly, alternate fuel vehicles and the transition as required. Now, there's something that people don't do a lot of. What they don't do is they actually don't connect today's situation to where the ultimate destination is going to be. So I'm going to try and do it in our presentation today, and hopefully that will give us some good discussion even for our workshops tomorrow and on Wednesday. All right. Green transport is what it is. The only three ways you could get to green transportation in the world, right? Is the type of transport you're going to use, what kind of fuel you're going to use, and the new technologies that you could employ. And it's not one or the other, it's a mix. Different countries, different islands, different societies will have different take on this. So for example, if I'm in a developed world, new technologies, it makes sense. All right, why does it make sense? Because we can afford it. In certain locales as well, types of transport, certain layouts, and I think one of the other presenters would have indicated it as well. They actually could make You could lay your public transportation out in a way that you could foster more walking, more pedestrian type traffic. You could lay it out, but those are things that are going to take many decades to already happen. And then there's the option of using cleaner fuels. So can I use cleaner fuel? Is the cleaner fuel going to be biofuel? Is it going to be methanol? Is it going to go into an existing car? Is it going to be something like, for example, hydrogen? Is it going to be electric? Are we going to have fuel cells? So green transportation will take very many different ways of making those things happen. All right. And we spoke about that. So these are the different types of land transport in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed anywhere throughout the world. So these are the options you're going to have. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, significant amount of public transportation will occur, not just with like the country's municipal bus system, but very significantly as well the maxi taxi system. It's been argued that about 300,000 people a day use the maxi taxis, and that's about 5,000 vehicles. And less than that would be the actual municipal transport system. Of course, they both have their strengths and they do have some of their weaknesses with that. So I'll not go through this. I think some of the previous speakers would have dealt with that in some detail. And of course, if you're looking to get green, you really need to be at the top of this upside down pyramid. The world and maybe the model that we've all been following is to own our own cars in the Caribbean as well. Owning your own cars, whether you're using green fuel in it, whether it's going to be an electric vehicle, all right, whether it's going to be hydrogen, is still not the most efficient way to get to the greenest form of transport. The greenest form of transport is, at the end of the day, it's walking, but we can't all walk, right? We live too far, and it just some places are not really configured for us to operate like that. All right, so this is kind of like the green pyramid for transportation. Somebody would have shown a picture. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Trinidad and Tobago normally outside of COVID. Yeah. So we actually have a culture that's now circled around being in traffic, being stuck in traffic, complaining about traffic, learning to read, not read, learning to, people will be learning things in traffic. Some will just be sitting there and just passing the time. So this is the reality of Trinidad. This is the reality of a lot of countries in and around the region as well. Right. What government has been doing, and that is a work still in progress, is to there's a policy draft that right now is being formulated to accelerate transportation towards better efficiency and to reduce our liquid fuel import requirements. Now, the CNG program is one of those programs, as a matter of fact, but there's a wider, more encompassing approach as well. All right, so this policy is to encourage one to transition to more efficient, public and private. They talk about smart transportation systems, making sure you're not wasting time at a stoplight, for example. Reducing the demand for transportation, that's going to be a real tricky one, but there's the opportunity as well to do that. And of course, making sure that as a start, that we can start looking at the other bit of transportation, which is by sea. Let's make sure we're using efficient fuel usage. Let's use cleaner fuels. So that's part of the energy conservation and energy efficiency policy and action plan for Trinidad and Tobago 2020 to 2024. That we're waiting with bated breath for that to be made public. Right. All right. Let's talk very quickly about 3 ways of getting greener. You could get greener by curbing. That's curbing the need for transportation, the demand for the motorized transport, and so on, or just having certain goods and services. You could shift. You could shift to walking, bicycling, and so on. You could carpool. There's also shifting to cleaner fuels. In our case, it's using natural gas as a cleaner fuel, but there are other cleaner fuels. There's fuel alcohol, fuel ethanol. There's methanol, depending on how you're generating that methanol. There's probably one day there's going to be hydrogen and so on as well, right? And then, of course, shifting to lower emitting vehicles or more energy efficient vehicles. And of course, there's also need to develop, right? So one way of also moving is to make sure we could develop. So there's new technology, there are new fuels and so on, and then you could develop, or you could encourage the transition towards alternate fuel vehicles, right? And of course, at the end of the day, Nothing could be done like that. You can't snap your finger and it happened overnight. I know there were some analogies made at some point in time. Somebody talked about transitioning food, different types of foods, different types of cameras, and the world wasn't ready for it. But a motor vehicle is something that is not going to be suddenly changed in an instant. The models might come in brand new, but changing the inventory of vehicles does take time, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, I think all of us have been experiencing this, right? So COVID has caused some decentralization. A lot of people that would need to be in the office could operate from home, some better than others, and maybe some more productively than others, and others maybe not so good. But decentralization, I think COVID and the pandemic certainly would have made the difference in us thinking about decentralization. So much so that BP closing down their head offices in London, in England. All right, why they're doing that? Because they realize we can actually operate in a more efficient and a very different form. So decentralization is certainly supposed to make an impact, or have an impact on fuel, on the need for transportation. And then there's the issue of mass transit. The Trinidad and Tobago experience is as follows. So we elected in 2014 to actually start to change certain things with mass transit. We have a well-established system. So let's change it, and while we're changing it, let's get it green at the same time. All right, or let's take the opportunity to get greener by changing certain things. So the government would have started off with the change to a cleaner fuel, which should have been the natural gas or natural gas buses. At the same time as well, the Maxi Taxi associations were our company, because we are heading the transition to a cleaner fuel, in this case, natural gas. We would have reached out to them first and said, guys, we would like you guys to work with us. Let's start to transition your membership into a cleaner fuel, which just happens to be 20% the price of the alternative fuels anyway. And we've seen that significant change. And that would have been one of the rapid bus sort of transit routes in Trinidad and Tobago, the priority bus route. And in that, one of the first observations that users would have indicated to us is that they no longer see the volume of pollutant buses that they had before, or pollutant maxis. They're seeing a difference. And it'd be really interesting to have people measure and see what the change is in terms of from a pollution point of view. But that's one of the things as well, mass transit shift. And of course, we know that the bus company is at some point in time going to, probably perhaps about 10% of their new fleet is going to be electrics as well. So we're waiting on bated breath to see how that evolves as well. Right now, what are our options for fuels? In the Caribbean, yes, we could use natural gas. We could use natural gas from oil and gas production. We could use renewable natural gas or biogas from waste and waste generation. There's also LPG. LPG is also a cleaner fuel. That works or can work in different jurisdictions, but in certain jurisdictions like in Trinidad and Tobago, it's too subsidized to be encouraged, so to speak. Electricity, of course, is the next shift that we're seeing, and electricity can work, it will work. It requires a little more thought as well in the implementation of it, but it could be headed in the right direction. And I'll put on the electricity hybrids as well. Hybrids fit there a bit, but it's not a complete fit, because a hybrid is still a fossil fuel vehicle at the end of the day. And then people have been talking about methanol. Can it happen? Yes, it might. That is in progress. Ethanol, some people will say, well, I'm taking sugarcane alcohol from Brazil, cutting down forests, so maybe I don't want it. It's not really green, or it's not green enough, or it's green with, with some contingent negative issues. And then there's hydrogen. Everybody's new focus, including ours as well, the NGC group, and that is something we're going to keep our eyes very closely on. It certainly works on, we understand it works well, but for certain types of transportation. What about vehicle emissions? In Trinidad, we don't have a vehicle emission standard. The rest of the world has any vehicle emission standard. Should we be transitioning to an alternate fuel vehicle future and not have this as something on the table? So many countries have it, and it keeps evolving every year or every few years. A matter of fact, what we have discovered now is that we actually bring in vehicles in Trinidad and Tobago that don't even, the fuel supplies that we use here, for example, some of the diesel would not meet the requirement of some of the very clean ones as well. So, you know, that's something that we need to be looking at, right? So maybe we should be looking at this. Maybe there should be a policy position around this. And should we tie incentives for alternate fuels around vehicles? In Trinidad and Tobago, we typically do it for type of vehicles and engine size, but maybe we should start looking at the grams of carbon per kilometer and so on. So this is something that we need to think about very carefully. It might be an item for a country's policy agenda. Harmonize it. We've been doing work about it, and I know some of the other Caribbean islands, but maybe we need to really step that up. Okay. What is very important? Behavior change. We keep talking about low carbon. Carbon and being green is the latest thing. Now, how are we really going to change behaviors? Is it easy to change? Maybe we need to have some handles about it. Some people say maybe we need to have higher fuel prices before, which would just happen to force us to change some more behaviors, because it might make that difference to people making the correct choices. Is it that when we go to buy that new car or that new vehicle that we actually think that we want to buy a green vehicle? Or is it convenient that we have a new vehicle with all the new features and everything, and it's, guess what? You know, it's state of the art. Is that the prime motivator? We've done surveys in Trinidad, and the environmental agenda and motivation for purchasing things is not high on people's list. It could, if it could get something and it's conveniently done at the same time, then that works. So we have to always think about behavioral changes, right? Just a point I want to make here, this was recent information. US President Biden would have indicated that they're going to green the government fleets. And he's talking about $174 billion investment and a certain amount of things, right? And the United States price tag is working out about the equivalent of about US $1.2 million per vehicle, all right? Is that achievable in the Caribbean context? Is that achievable in the Trinidad and Tobago context? You know, that's a matter of priorities and where you want to spend your money, right? But this is the biggest country, this is the wealthiest country in the world looking to make a dent, and where they will lead, others are sure to follow. All right, so maybe there's a space inside there for us. We are already doing it, but it does come at a price tag. Okay. I'm going to step away now a little bit from land transport very quickly into marine transport, and in the interest of time, this you will get. I know the attendees will get a copy of this. Just to state that there is the world is moving towards cleaner, greener marine transportation, right? And there are regulations that are going to control it, so we'll have to comply at some point in time, right? And one of the easiest way of doing that is to switch into fuels that will meet the requirements, right? Or in certain instances, change the type of vessels that you have to do. And right now, there's kind of a case being made right now for LNG, because it's there. It's already a market that we have. It is cleaner than, it may not be green if it's coming from oil and gas, but it is certainly cleaner than what the other options would have been, like normal marine fuel, right? So it is an option for us, all right? And the general thinking is that there are several different ways to get a clean fuel. You could use carbon fuels, as we just spoke about. We could look at the carbon neutral, the biofuels, and so on, and then the zero carbon. Each of these is a different level, a different order of magnitude involvement in terms of effort and investment. All right, but everybody's headed in that direction. We will see some very aggressive movement in that direction. We've been talking about green ammonia, green methanol to power ships. So it's happening, it's coming. We're hearing about the pilot projects as well. All right, so we have some really good references, and it will be included here in the slide pack for you to peruse at your leisure. Even in the rest of the Caribbean, in certain locations, we'll find very well that some of the cruise ships themselves will start getting cleaner if they haven't been so already, right? And you need to equip your ports and so on to handle or to service that sort of fueling. So very, very quickly, we look at Trinidad and Tobago, and we look at what would be the most attractive option. And this is some work being done here at the NGC group. The studies are pointing towards LNG for Trinidad and Tobago. People are still thinking about methanol and ammonia. And of course, everybody's looking at hydrogen and biofuels as options for marine transportation. But as it is right now, LNG is the preferred market-ready solution to address the international marine standards now. Right? So just to put a little perspective on where we're heading in that regard. All right. And a little more information here. So we also going with which clean fuels that the world should be migrating to is also, we need to look at how do we fuel it. We have options in Trinidad and Tobago. We are, as the NGC group, are exploring the potential to establish LNG fuel bunkering in Trinidad and Tobago, and maybe also in some of the other locations in and around the Caribbean, right? Okay, this is for aviation, this slide. There's not a whole lot to go except to say that a study was done by in partnership with the UN and with the European Union, actually, sorry, and the Civil Aviation Authority in Trinidad and Tobago, and they had a study on it, and really and truly, it's very limited. It's unviable right now in Trinidad and Tobago. So the only place that they saw some advantages would have been on the ground support airside vehicles, you know, the vehicles that will handle filling moving the fuel tanks, moving the bags and so on, the baggage and so on. The vehicles that are going to be on the side of on the actual tarmac, and they are looking at the options of biodiesel. They also looked at natural gas as a substitute, and long term they're thinking they want to go electric vehicles as well, maybe have them charge. So that's where the aviation side of it is, as far as Trinidad and to understand some of the rest of the Caribbean would be. Now, let me just quickly go over the CNG program as it relates to the greening of fuels. We started off in 2013, it was conceptualized, and from 2014 to now, we did the CNG program as an implementation program. So I think the previous, yes, Selena would have spoken before and indicated about public participation. The CNG program is actually that. So what we did is we were given an instruction to do something. We went into the market and we had others who did work for us essentially and to their benefit. So the automotive dealers, they started introducing OEM models. A matter of fact, we kept selling single model in Trinidad and Tobago right now is a natural gas vehicle as a single model. The hybrids, when you add them up together, would add up to more, of course, but I mean, they're coming from several different brands. Then we put our CapEx program in place. We started building gas stations. And once we started getting supply in place, then we started to market the actual vehicles a lot. And when we did that, we had private sector was handling all the conversions. We weren't doing conversions. We were contracting conversions. So they purchased, they did all they needed to do. And so they are the ones that are in charge of the business. We supply the materials. And then we continue to have aggressive growth. As a matter of fact, we went from about 10 conversions a year to 15 conversions a day, right? And this is private sector working together in partnership with us, and that's been fantastic. We also would have intervened with the institutions with revised national standards for the fuel that we are dealing with. We also work with certain training institutes for them to sort of offer the right kind of training and internship programs. And then we actually had international firms come and do safety audits about, hey, are we doing the right things? Right? So all of that is part of the program. And in 2021, this year, we actually transitioned from, instead of supporting certain market segments, let the banks and financial institutions get in the business. Let them start financing conversions of vehicles. This is you take an existing vehicle, they convert it. So I didn't explain. You convert your existing vehicle from a gasoline or diesel vehicle into a natural gas as an additional fuel to what you have, right? And the stats would be, this is basically stated that, you know, we spent about $232 million in the program. The beneficiaries of the program, including the public and the rest of government agencies, would have benefited up to about $960 million. So we actually tabulate and track who's getting what in this particular business. And we would have saved to date close to 35,000 tons of carbon. And last year alone, the CNG consumers would have used natural gas, and by switching to natural gas, it would have been equivalent of taking off the road 3,000 gasoline vehicles. So that's our difference there. Now, In the transition to alternate fuel vehicles, we have a lot to be said, but you need to make it happen. It's not going to happen by itself. We also need to think about the existing stock of vehicles. In one particular program, when we switch people out from, say, Maxis to natural gas Maxis, they have to bring the old diesel Maxis and have it destroyed. We're not going to incentivize them, for example, unless it's destroyed. Now, what's going to happen in Trinidad and Tobago when we bring in hybrids and electrics and so on, and nobody's removing the old vehicles? That's something that is not being dealt with. All right. Then the consumer also has to accept new technologies with all these vehicles, because we hear people saying that electrics would be the way, but I'll show some figures. It's still not happening fast enough, because the consumer has not yet accepted it when they have to purchase. All right. And then, of course, you have to deal with availability. You have to deal with price of the vehicles and the benefit to the environment. Is it really a greener vehicle? We need to assess all of that. And then, of course, is what models they have and range and safety. So transition to alternate fuel vehicles require all of those things that we think about. Now, what we did here very quickly is to show, based on what the new car dealers tell us, this is where vehicles have been going in the last, from 2017 to now. It is starting to move. Now, Trinidad has had, since 2016, incentives for all alternate fuel vehicles. As of last year, we stopped. All right, so we've seen the declines coming in. Now, this is just a new car business, but as far as we know, there's also the used car business. And when we add the new and the used car business, the alternate fuel vehicle space could be close to, not counting CNG vehicles, about close to about 20,000 or so vehicles. So it is increasing. It's not increasing fast enough. As a matter of fact, our conversion programs towards CNG vehicles, that alternate fuel, so switching fuel, is making a big difference locally. Right? Well, this is just to show you a different pie chart where all the vehicles, the percentages are. So the natural gas vehicle space as an alternate fuel in Trinidad is significant. Hybrids are coming on. Electric vehicles are not coming on fast enough, but it will come on eventually. Right? Now, this is the slide I just want to let people understand a bit. What we did is we simulated, and this is in conjunction with others, how the vehicle market is probably going to look like by 2040. So we make an assumption that in the reality, by 2040, you can't buy an internal combustion engine. Now we're talking about trucks and everything here, right? We're looking at saying that so by 2040, only battery electric vehicles and hybrids are going to be coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And we say, well, okay, we'll continue to convert vehicles because conversion does not require you have to import, right? And the total vehicles that are coming in every year is only going to be 25,000 vehicles. Now, when we look at this, we see by 2040, all these, we still have 80% of internal combustion engines in the market. Now, is somebody going to take their internal combustion engine and get rid of it? No. It's going to stay there until it's no longer good. Now, we have vehicles in Trinidad and Tobago right now that are 40 years old on the roads, and they're working well. And the point we want to make here is that, you see, all of these vehicles here, every single one from hybrids down, could be outfitted with natural gas as well. So we have an option to clean things up. All right. You can't do anything with a battery electric vehicle. So, but this is what we think, based on the reality and consumer preferences so far, is what we see. So, I mean, that's subject to debate. All right. Now let's look at, if we say by 2030, not a single internal combustion engine is going to come to Trinidad and Tobago again. So it's primarily going to be battery electric vehicles and hybrids. Let's have a look at this. We still have about 70% at that time. 70% of the vehicles are going to be into the mix, are going to be internal combustion engines. And if you add up the CNG vehicles, it's still going to go up past 80-something%. So this picture here is what we need to be cognizant of, because transition, you cannot switch all the vehicles in a country from internal combustion engine to a different technology. The inventory is still going to be there, and it still has to be serviced. In other words, yes, people, they still have good money in the gas station business and trying to be given selling gasoline and diesel, right? So can we achieve our carbon targets? Yes, we can, but we're going to have to do it on all fronts, every single way. Hybrid will give you about a 30% reduction in carbon in city driving. Electric vehicles will also give you some very similar type, because in Trinidad we're using fossil fuel for that. And then if I were to switch my gasoline or my diesel to a natural gas vehicle, I could also get 30% carbon reduction. And then if I start, which is the intention this year, they're going to start converting hybrid internal combustion engines on the hybrids to start converting them to CNG. That's also going to be another improvement here. So that will help us with our carbon targets, right? In the interest of time, I'm just going to point out one thing here. We do have a problem generally with transition of vehicles. The fleet operators in Trinidad, people who buy trucks and vans and so on, typically say that they want to transition to cleaner fuels, but when they go into the oil and gas facilities, they're not allowed to bring in anything besides a diesel vehicle. So we ask the question, and we know this for a fact. We have people that actually take diesel vehicles, go into a site, bring out containers of butane or propane or whatever it is, park it up, and then put a natural gas truck to pull the items in Trinidad and Tobago, because they're not allowed to go the natural gas truck. Now, in other jurisdictions in the world, we've seen alternate fuel vehicles entering in process plants and so on. They've kept pace with the technology and the transitions, but that still has to happen in Trinidad and Tobago. So one of the things we ask the question is, what's going to happen when you want to go to that hybrid van or that electric van to go into a process plant area or into an oil and gas facility? What's going to happen? Somebody needs to have a look at that, because the fleet operators, and they tell us, they can't purchase anything new. They have to purchase all the existing things as they are now, okay? And just to close off my discussion here, we have several programs that we are looking to do with the institutions, UTT and ourselves. We're looking at some of these programs here to collect data, assess mass emission rates and so on, to do well-to-wheel analysis. And then we're also looking at doing joint arrangements with regional transport authorities. So, and you will be hearing a little more about this. We are looking to work with UWI with the Energy Center for Excellence for Sustainable and for Future Technologies. We are looking at doing a potential MOU with them to expand to that space, bring the local institutions along with us, and have a vibrant environment for us to develop and head towards a green transport solutions in the world, right? So thank you all very much. So I'll finish in the interest of time. So land transport, we continue to curb, shift, and develop. Marine, we see LNG as the option. Aviation is not quite there yet. And when we transition to alternate fuel vehicles, we need to really think about how we go about doing it. We need to have all the technologies all at the same time, right? And we need to work with energy industry. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much.
And thank you so much, Curtis. Very, very thought-provoking. Curb, shift, develop, and we're going to be talking some more about that tomorrow. Yeah. Now I'm going to share my screen. I think I have it now. Let's see if I get it. There we are on the map, and we're stretching from Canada to all the way to Eastern Europe, India. We have South Africa, we have Malta, we have all through the Caribbean. A couple of my colleagues up in the States as well. We have Europe as well. So that this is truly an international conference, and welcome you all. Thank you so much. And